Welcome to the Liberty Show. I'm anti-oligarchy.
And I'm Manuel Carlos.
Hey, by the way, where's Ron?
I haven't seen Ron. I think he's on assignment somewhere.
Okay. I was just wondering.
I think he'll be back the next episode. Or actually, this is going to be a two-parter, so he'll be back in a couple episodes. What we're going to do today is we're going to show a video. This is actually going to be a two-part episode. This is Mike Maloney and Peter Schiff actually got together, and they're sitting across from a table and they're discussing economics. And I mentioned this on a Liberty Show a while back. I really got into the Liberty movement by reading a book by Mike Maloney called Investing in Gold and Silver. And when I got that book, I remember having some coins when I was a kid, and I put some money into it, and I thought coins were neat, and I was trying to have a collectible value, and I thought, well, I wonder if this is a hobby I want to get into again. So I saw this book, got it at the library, and I'm expecting him to say, look for a coin that has no scratches on it, or it's so shiny, or it's in good condition. And next thing I know, he's going into monetary theory, monetary history, Austrian economics, libertarian principles, and he had Ron Paul in there, and he's the one that actually got me exposed to Ron Paul, because I had heard of Ron Paul before that from like Rush Limbaugh say, no, he was crazy. And so I'm like, wow, geez, if Rush says Ron Paul's crazy, he's crazy. Well, then I realized that
it's actually
Rush Limbaugh. That's the crazy one, or he's bought out. So anyway, and then Peter Schiff is Erwin Schiff's son, and he actually was an advisor for Ron Paul, I think, in the 2007-2008 campaign that he was running. So what we're going to do, this is it's important. They're going to be talking about, and I don't think it's going to be dry, and it really shouldn't be. I mean, you should be. I'm not saying you should be. I guess we're libertarians. We're not telling you to do anything. But the economics and the value of the dollar and everything affects us all. And so this is an important topic, and they're taking it from the perspective, we are where we are right now because of government intervention.
Yes. Big government is not the solution. We've tried that already excessively, and it's not working. So you know, we'll take a look at this and see if we can maybe shed some light on a new way of looking at things.
And we're going to jump in here and there and maybe give some of our takes on it, or some things that jump out at us. So here we go. Mike Maloney and Peter Schiff.
I was in Puerto Rico a little while back, and Peter Schiff invited me over to his house, and we were just amazed at how we are exactly on the same page when it comes to everything economically. And so he just made a trip out to California near my offices, and we decided we'd get together and discuss some of this stuff. So on your travels lately, Peter, you were just at a show. You were speaking. Where were you at?
I was in Las Vegas. You know, it's great to see you again, Mike. And, you know, I was speaking to a very mainstream audience of hedge fund managers at an annual conference there. And, you know, what was really interesting is, even though the audience was, as I said, very mainstream, and I was on a panel with a lot of very high-profile mainstream individuals, the only person that really got applause was me. I also got some laughs because I told a few jokes, but I think people really got what I was saying. And I had maybe 50 or 100 people come up to me afterwards and shake my hand, you know, really appreciate the candor with which I spoke, and I really agree with what you had to say. And I was saying some things that the mainstream really never hears about the real problems in the U.S. economy, and I blamed it all on the Fed. And everybody else was a cheerleader there for the Fed. In fact, Ben Bernanke spoke at the same event as me, and he was introduced as being the savior of the U.S. economy, and I think he damned it.
I absolutely agree. I saw you had your picture taken with him, right?
Yeah, you know, we were at a cocktail party following the event.
Okay, notice how he referenced Ben Bernanke, well, as a savior. Okay, he's not calling him that, but mainstream media and the kind of general public are going to view him in that way. And I guess what's really disturbing is here we see a perfect example of how statism has become religion. And we had talked about that in a previous episode, but just the verbiage being used. You know, Ben Bernanke is a savior. Peter Schiff says no, he actually damned it, condemning something to hell. You know, it's actually now part of so as much as we would like to say that politics, religion, economics, all of that are like separate categories, they are not. They are now in our culture, they are all one.
Okay, here
sorry.
we go.
Following the event, and I thought people would get the irony of the juxtaposition between the two of us, you know, kind of having a glass to drink.
I think that he and Greenspan have absolutely destroyed America. People don't realize what is coming from the stored up energy from the manipulations that they did.
And in speaking to him, and it was really the first chance I had to really have a conversation with Ben Bernanke, and in speaking to him, I really got the sense that he has no idea of the Fed's culpability in the housing bubble or the ensuing financial crisis. He really doesn't know. And he denies that the Fed had anything to do with that it was maybe pure happenstance or coincidence that we had a housing bubble and these very low interest rates. And because Ben Bernanke still doesn't get the connection between the Fed's mistakes of the past and the last crisis, he certainly doesn't understand the coming crisis, which is going to be far worse because the mistakes the Federal Reserve made in the aftermath of that crisis are far worse than the ones and far bigger than the ones that caused it.
Right, yeah. Ben Bernanke's overreaction was far bigger than Greenspan's overreaction to the NASDAQ.
And as a result, the crisis that's in our future, unfortunately, is going to be far larger than the one that we just experienced.
Okay. I wanted to show you a couple things because I have a feeling that you and I will be exactly on the same page here. You know how...
I just wanted to add a point. Ben Bernanke really is not the only one that doesn't get it either. You know, Peter Schiff and Mike Maloney too, but I don't think at the time Mike Maloney was well known, but Peter Schiff had actually predicted all that, and a lot of the Austrian economists did. And so now people will admit, oh yeah, you were right on that, but it's different this time. Even though we're doing the exact same things, and we're actually making the problem worse, and we're pumping up the bubble again, and jobs are down, and incomes are down, there's no problem this time. And there's just a lot of people out there that think that are going to be blindsided again.
And it's really, you want to talk about a shame. You know, if this had happened, you know, quite a while ago, and we so to speak learned our lesson and did not continue to reinflate these economic bubbles, whether it be reinflating the housing one, which is going on currently, or even worse, the student loan bubble, which when that one goes, you know, it's kind of like he was alluding to, the upcoming catastrophe in that arena is going to make the housing bubble of 2008 look like a cakewalk. So basically, you know, did they really not understand, or is it one of those things where you just stick your head in the sand and refuse to, you know, as long as I'm not in office when this thing blows, you know, I think that's also another component to this too. It's that kick the can down the road. You know, when this thing goes, I'm not going to be in office, so it won't matter to me. And it's the ultimate in greedy, selfish behavior.
You know, the difference though between the housing bubble and with the education bubble, at least if they repossess your degree, you're like, it's not doing me any good anyway. Go ahead and take it. So, all right, let's go back.
Indicators, there's all these different factors in the economy, and they'll be going up at different rates, and then suddenly one or two indicators start to point down when you're near a top, and then more of them start to point down, and then things roll over, and then there's a crash, and everybody thinks that nobody saw it coming. But there's a few people that are watching this stuff that
Well,
do
that's
see it coming.
exactly what they said about the last crash, that nobody
Yeah.
could have possibly predicted this,
Right.
except there were people who did predict it, but
You
people ignored
predicted
them.
that we
Yes.
were in a real estate bubble. I predicted that we were in a real estate bubble. There's
And
just
Ben
a
Bernanke
few.
denied there was a real estate bubble. Even after it burst, he still couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, and what amazes me is people like Bernanke are taken seriously still, and the people that did predict it are dismissed as lunatics half the time. It really burns me up. But this is manufacturing new orders for consumer goods. And this is from the Fed's website. And you can see this big plunge that it took in 2008. And there's a big plunge that's happening right now that suggests to me if people aren't ordering new goods, that it feels like this could be that this summer maybe.
Well,
or
remember,
something.
the air is coming out of the bubble because the Fed halted or paused its quantitative easing program. Most people think they ended it, but I think it's just a pause because now everybody expects the Fed to raise interest rates because they think the recovery finally has enough traction that it no longer needs the emergency life support of 0%, yet your chart is showing, and a lot of other economic indicators are showing, that the economy has already rolled over and is rapidly headed back to recession.
Right, so they can't raise interest
Yeah,
rates,
even though the
right?
Fed hasn't raised them yet. All they've done is talk about raising them in the future, and we're already rolling over back into recession. So, so I believe that the Fed is going to have to do another round of quantitative easing, that they're not going to raise rates, and that's going to be a shocker. It's going to send shockwaves throughout the currency markets and the bond markets because everybody expects the Fed to raise rates, and when they don't do it because the economy is too fragile, because it's just a bubble, not a legitimate recovery, then people are now going to have to second guess their idea that what the Fed did worked. Instead of calling Ben Bernanke a hero, a lot more people are going to say, wait a minute, he wasn't a hero. What he did wasn't heroic. He took the coward's way out because all he did was exacerbate the problems to postpone the day of reckoning.
Yeah, the derivatives are bigger instead of smaller. Everything that was put in place to create that bubble that then popped, the too big to fail banks are all bigger. Nothing's been addressed, right?
No, those banks are now bigger than ever.
Yeah.
And if it was going to be a problem to let them fail in 2008, it's going to be a much bigger problem to let them fail in 2016.
Yeah.
So the government has to do whatever it can, unfortunately, to keep the bubble from popping. And I think the air is already coming out even without a rate hike. But
And so do I. Yeah.
But more importantly, see, the reason that he's been able to look like he's succeeded is because of the illusion that it's all temporary. Everybody believes that the Fed can normalize rates, shrink their balance sheet, but when they realize that they can't do that, that they've been lied to, right, then this is going to be a major event for the currency markets and the financial markets when people come to terms with the predicament that we're in, right, that it's QE infinity, that rates have to stay at zero in perpetuity because the debt is now so enormous that even the slightest increase in interest rates would collapse the system because there's just so much debt.
I agree. I don't think that they can raise interest rates. The next thing here is rejection of credit applications. And I wasn't following this chart before. I just saw it in somebody's newsletter. I think this is a Zero Hedge maybe. But, this is the crisis of '08, and look at what happened in March for credit application rejections.
Yeah.
So there's something happening in the economy.
One of it is the big transformation from full-time employment to part-time jobs. Everybody points to all the jobs that are being created and the low unemployment rate. But the problem is the unemployment rate dropped not because people found jobs, but because A, they stopped looking, or B, they settled for a part-time job. So when people who used to have full-time jobs now have part-time jobs, they don't have the income to get the credit that they need.
So they apply for a loan and it gets rejected.
Yeah, and you have home ownership rates now at almost 30-year lows.
Right.
Yet rents are rising. I mean, now you have a record number. 50% of people, or excuse me, 25% of people who are renting now devote half their income to pay their housing costs. That's never happened before. You have hardly anything left over for food or other expenditures that you have, and people are loaded up with student loans. And unfortunately, a lot of these college grads now have student loans, and all they can get is minimum wage jobs, and a lot of them are just part-time. So people are trying to get by. In fact, a lot of people are actually enrolling in college now, not because they want the education, because they need the loans. They just want to get the money so they can pay their utility bills. They don't even care. And a lot of our college grads, when they graduate with lots of debt, they can't find jobs. So they go to grad school to get a master's degree. Now they have even more debt, but they still can't get a job.
Right, right. Yeah, the big debt that has been plaguing us lately, the growth in debt, a lot of it is in student loans and auto loans. There's subprime auto loans now.
Yeah, as if the government didn't learn their lesson from the housing bubble, they decided to create a auto bubble. Because, when the governments, when GM and Chrysler went bankrupt, the government also acquired their financing divisions, and they still own them. So the government, after they bailed out these companies, they certainly didn't want them to fail again. They wanted to make it look like the bailout was a good idea. So they wanted to revive their profits by making it possible for just about anybody to buy a car. And so a lot of people have been able to buy cars with zero down, and they've been stretching out their payments so that now people are getting 6 and 7 year auto loans.
Right, the 7-year auto loan.
But the problem is,
only lasts maybe that long.
Well, the warranty only lasts for
ever.
4 years, 4 or 5 years tops. And when these cars come out of warranty, try to have it repaired. We don't have a lot of repair places anymore. It costs a fortune.
Right.
And of course, the value of the cars are plunging. People are going to have a lot less equity in their car than the remaining payments on their mortgage. And so they end up not making the payments. Now you got to repossess the cars, but there's a huge bubble. But interestingly enough, the first 4 months of 2015, this is the worst start to a year in auto sales since 2009. So It looks to me like the air is coming out of the auto bubble already. We've already saturated the market, and so this is just the beginning of the decline.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to say something about the auto. I used to work for one of the big three a number of years back. And one of the classes I went through, they had somebody come in and speak, and this is about financing. And it used to be the rule of thumb was, don't get a car loan unless you can pay it off in 2 years. Well, what had happened was cars started outpacing wages, so they went to the 3-year, 4-year, 5-year loan.
Yeah.
And this probably goes back, more than 10 years ago since I took this class. I know it was more than 10 years ago. And they were starting to fool around, like they said, with the 7-year. Now I think, did they say 8-year auto loans?
I don't think so. Not quite yet.
Not quite yet, but
it wouldn't surprise me.
what had happened was there was I believe in the late 90s, if I remember right, there was an auto bubble then, because what the leasing started coming on, and what they did was they kind of manipulate the numbers, and they said, okay, if you lease, you really have use of the car for a couple years, and it's going to be worth so much, so we're going to lower your payment. And they got a lot of people in to those cars, and then there was a glut of cars coming back, and then the prices went down, and then there was a decline in the 90s. But they had to keep coming up with different ways so that people could afford it, because our jobs are going overseas, they're inflating the dollar, so the price of everything's going up, and how can we afford these? And what you're going to find, and you know this from having your own car, you start getting a few years into it, if you're still making payments, then you're also paying for repairs.
Yep.
And it gets pretty costly. So, all right, we'll go back to them.
Home mortgages, they're going longer now than 30 years. There's longer home mortgages being offered too, trying to keep that bubble inflated.
Well, and of course, they're offering 3.5% down payments now too, with government guarantees, which was part of the problem, because 3.5% is not enough down to actually have skin in the game. It costs you more than that just to sell a house. So if you buy a house with 3.5% down, the minute your mortgage closes, you're already underwater. But the problem is now you're giving the homeowner, a free, gamble on the real estate market, because if real estate prices go up, he can keep the profits, refinance. If prices go down, he could just walk away. But better than that, he could just stop making his payments altogether and live, rent-free for 3 years before they can kick you out. So that's really what they set up. And I think a lot of the recent home buyers that did put 3.5% down are going to do just that. They're just going to stop making their payments when they realize that they're underwater, especially when a lot of their repair bills come in, because a lot of people who are lulled into buying homes they couldn't afford, once they see that it's not just the mortgage, but you also have maintenance and property taxes, and some of these people might lose their jobs in this next recession. And so they no longer even have the income to service. And a lot of these people, too, have adjustable rate mortgage. Imagine the people who, they're not even taking out a 30-year
rates
fixed.
this low,
yes,
they still buy an adjustable
because
rate
they couldn't
mortgage.
afford the fixed rate. That's how stretched they are. You know, the real solution to the housing problem is to let real estate prices come down so that homes are affordable. But the government doesn't want to do that because it will bankrupt all the banks that loaned on them. So what their answer is to keep prices inflated and just make credit available by keeping interest rates low and throwing the lending standards out the window so that people can buy houses that they can't afford.
Ben Bernanke recently commented on the savings glut. He doesn't think people are spending enough. And what's interesting is that when you find out what constitutes savings, paying down debt is not included in this calculation. So any currency that goes to that is considered savings for some reason. They consider paying down debt savings.
Well, it's money you haven't spent. But I think when Bernanke is talking about a savings glut,
they're paying for previous consumption, basically, when you pay down savings.
Right, but when they're talking about the savings glut, they're referring to in other countries, not the United States. We have a savings shortage. There's maybe a glut of savings in Asia, for example. You know, but people look at that. I read an article recently about that Chinese, have this big savings problem. They have a bad habit of savings, like smoking or something, as if savings is a virtue. That we're lecturing this Chinese, telling them, hey, you guys are saving too much. You need to spend more money. And one of the criticisms was that they didn't have Social Security. They expected the Chinese to save for their own retirement. Imagine that, allowing people the freedom to save for their own retirement. And we basically said, no, China needs a gigantic Ponzi scheme run by the government. They should adopt Social Security so that the Chinese people won't have to save anymore, as if savings are somehow undermining economic growth. But the only problem for China is that they're squandering their savings on U.S. treasuries. They're loaning the money to us, and we'll never pay it back. So that's a waste of their savings. They need to invest their savings productively in their own economy. And I think that is going to happen. And when it does, the dollar is going to come crashing down.
Yeah, I agree. And then the engineering of the entire economy and the illusion. This is interest rates from 1950 to today. And then we have base money is the red line here. And then I plotted the Wilshire 5,000 total market cap index, so the value of the 5,000 largest companies in America. And what you see, I'll zoom in on this section here, you see that they took rates down to zero and at the same time created all this currency, and the correlation between currency creation and the markets is just mind-bogglingly close. It cannot possibly be an accident.
Of course not.
The markets,
and that's why they can't raise rates. They can't raise rates without bursting that bubble. To not understand how these things are connected the way they are. It's one causes the other. And because I've heard people say, well, Peter, we've had 4%, 5% interest rates in the past, so why can't we go back there now? I mean, it didn't create a problem then because we didn't have the enormity of the debt that we have now. It's one thing to have higher interest rates when you don't have a lot of debt. Sure, you can afford it. But when you're overwhelmed by debt, you can't afford it. And the other thing is when you've been on 0% for 6 years, you develop an addiction to that. We have built an entire economy around free money. You can't take that away. Right? You can't, even if the interest rates are still low, even if they just went to 2 or 3%, yes, that's still low, but not low enough for an economy addicted to 0%. Right? If you're a heroin addict and your body is used to a certain amount of heroin, and then your pusher says, look, I can only give you half what I normally give you, but you still have some heroin, that's not going to cut it. Right? You're going to already start to go through withdrawal. That's why the Fed, supposedly we've been in a recovery for 6 years, yet interest rates are still at zero. I mean, if it was a real recovery, they would have raised rates years ago.
Yes,
but they're afraid to do it because they know it's phony. But after a while, they had to at least talk about raising interest rates. They have to pretend that there's an exit strategy somewhere. But, just like somebody who's overweight and talks about going on a diet in the future, they don't go on one in the present. So the Fed wants to maintain a ruse that they can raise rates by talking about their intention to raise rates. But they don't actually do it. And they play word games. They talk about, well, we're going to be patient, or we're going to wait a considerable period, or now they take away the word patient, but we're not impatient. Meanwhile, and now they're saying, well, we can't raise rates until unemployment improves. Well, I mean, it's been supposedly improving. The unemployment rate is 5.5%. They initially said they would raise rates if it got to 6.5%. But the bottom line is, it doesn't matter where the unemployment rate goes, doesn't matter how high the inflation rate goes, they can never raise rates without precipitating a worse financial crisis than the one we had in '08.
So you and I just absolutely agree that this entire recovery has been engineered through the creation of currency. Now, if Keynesian economics was remotely plausible, if it worked, would they have needed a QE2 or a QE3?
Well, no, it would have worked the first time.
Right.
The reason they've done it 3 times is because it fails every time, which is why they're going to do a 4th, right? Quantitative easing is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Right? You can't put the fire out, you just make the fire bigger. But the problem is, when all you have is gasoline, right? You don't, that's all you can do. And the Keynesians don't understand that their own remedy is the reason the patient is so sick. And they just want to keep on administering it. But I don't even think we've had a recovery. We haven't recovered from anything. We're sicker than ever. And the average American knows that. I mean, the man on the street can feel his standard of living declining. Despite what the Federal Reserve says, the cost of living is going up. The quality of jobs is going down. All the Fed is doing with its monetary policy is redirecting resources from productive uses on Main Street to speculation on Wall Street. They're propping up the stock market. They're propping up housing. They're diverting loans to things like education. They're propping up healthcare. But the real economy is disintegrating, and Americans can feel that. I mean, if we actually had a real recovery, we wouldn't be talking about, all the jobless recovery, right? Well, the reason it's jobless is because it's not a recovery. If it was a recovery, there would be good jobs. And the jobs that are being created, I think the most interesting thing is who's getting them. Because they look at the labor force participation rate, which is the lowest it's been since the mid-1970s. And everybody wants to say, well, it's because the baby boom is retiring. So, hey, there's nothing we can do about it. We all know there's a baby boom. They're getting old. They must be retiring. That's why the labor force is shrinking. And a lot of people accept that on face value. Even Janet Yellen, says that, right? But the reality is the baby boomers, the older people, they're the ones that are working in record numbers. In fact, there are months when the only jobs that are created are for people 55 and older. It's the younger people in their 20s and 30s that are leaving the labor force. And what's happening is you've got so many Americans who were retired, who have to come out of retirement and take a part-time job so they can pay their utility bills or they can put food on the table. That's where all the jobs are coming. And so the labor force participation is not about people retiring. The people who should be retiring can't afford to. And the younger people who should be working can't get jobs. That's the truth behind the numbers.
Yeah. The markets are in a bubble. I think that there's a crash coming. This is Dr. Robert Shiller's data. It's a little bit of a confusing chart because it's got 2 data plots on it, interest rates in red. But the valuation of the stock market judged by PE ratios. And you see bubbles in 1901 and then undervalued in 21 and overvalued during the peak of the 29 stock market bubble. And without exception, once it reaches a bubble, it bounces on the way down, but it has to go to undervaluation before a new bull market can start. There was a peak in 1966 of about 22, and then the peak in 2000 where it was 40, PE ratios over 45, which was absolute insanity, and it started to bounce. It went down to fair value, but then bounced back up into a bubble here at 27. We're in an extreme bubble.
Yeah.
And so with these other indicators turning, do you think we're in for a stock market crash?
Yeah, and I think, first of all,